Okay, welcome back. So we've gone through envelopes and talked about what they are and what they do. Now it's time to move on to the other modulation sources within Massive. So you can see over here in the center window, we have numbers 5 through 8 that are green. Each of these has a selectable mode on the top right here. So I can choose either LFO, Performer, or Stepper. And that's true for each of these four here, numbers 5 through 8. But in this, so we'll talk about performers and steppers later, but in this lecture we're going to talk about the LFO. The LFO stands for low frequency oscillator. And what that means is that we can generate a very low frequency signal that does not add any audio to the patch, but rather modulates a certain parameter that I can assign it to. In other words, I can use the waveforms within the LFO to create movement over time with some of these parameters. Each LFO page actually has two low-frequency oscillator waves included within it, and you can see that here in this middle portion with the graphical display. I have two sine waves here on top of each other, and I can use this crossfade curve to create a blend between the two, and I can even add a modulation source to this crossfade curve so I can have this continuously moving between the two, and that's pretty cool too. You can also control the phase of your oscillator by clicking and dragging and just moving this around. You can see how my phase is changing when I'm moving it to the left or to the right. So you can change the starting point there. I can also select different curves. Here we have the four basic waveforms that we talked about in a previous lecture. We have the sine wave, the sawtooth wave, the square wave, and the triangle wave. Or I can select from this drop-down box some more unique waves that look sort of strange and interesting, like that. It's the same thing is true for this bottom LFO. It's the exact same, but you can obviously select two different waveforms for the top and the bottom, and indeed that's probably what you would use that for anyway. So we have a few more parameters over here on the left to talk about. First, we have a rate knob. This controls the speed of the cycle. And so obviously, if I pull this down, we'll have a slower movement through this cycle. And if it's up higher, then we'll have a faster cycle. If I choose this sync button, now I have a couple more options that appear. I have a ratio selector, and that means that when my sync button is selected, I can actually sync this up to the tempo of the patch or of the the project that I'm working in within my sequencer. And this ratio works like this. If I have it on 1 to 4, then the cycle will complete every quarter note. So it will go 4 times in a bar. If I have it on 1/16, then the cycle will occur over the course of 1/16 note, like that. You can also set this top ratio selector up to 3, for example, or 4, but that would just be the same as 1/4, okay? The position selector here is a new feature that has been added to the new rollout of Massive. And this has to do with changing the ratio in the middle of the cycle. This is a little bit advanced, but we might as well just talk about it. So when the position button is not selected, if I'm playing a note and my LFO is working and I change the ratio in the middle of that cycle, then the ratio will change exactly where I tell it to, and therefore it will not remain synced up with the tempo. However, if my position button is selected, when I change the ratio, it will stutter a little bit and it will sync back up to the tempo with the new ratio that I have set. So that's a way that you can use this by not having the position button selected to create some out of phase oscillation, but you still want it to be the rate to be in line with the tempo of the song, but you don't necessarily want it to be right on the downbeats, for example. That's what you can use this position selector for. The restart button means that you can toggle this restart button, and you can decide whether you want each new MIDI note to trigger a new round of the cycle from the beginning, or if it's deselected, then my LFO is going to be moving regardless of whether I'm playing a note or not. When I play a note and send that MIDI information, that note will jump in at the point of the cycle of the LFO that it's already at. Okay. Similar to that is the mono button over here. The mono button will allow me to be playing multiple notes, and my LFO is operating in a monophonic way. In other words, if I strike a note, the LFO is moving, and I play another note, then that second note will jump in at the same place in the modulation rather than starting at the beginning. And you can use that even in conjunction with restart. So each new note, each note that you just play solo will restart the modulation. But if I jump in with another note, that second note will jump in at wherever in the cycle that my modulation is. You also have an amplitude knob down here, and this just controls the level of the modulation. So be careful of this because you can be building your LFO here, and if this is all the way down, you're not going to be hearing any modulation. So you can control the depth, in other words, of the modulation by using this amp knob. There's a modulation handle here as well, and you can play with that. So up at the top, we can select different presets, just like with our envelopes. And this will provide some different options, like this. You can also save your own LFO presets, and those will pop up in the user when you're done with saving them, or you can delete them. These controls are just the same as our envelopes. And then now the last thing to talk about is this internal envelope over here, which is pretty cool. You can use this internal envelope to control the parameters within this LFO just by clicking up here and dragging it in. So you'll see there's an AD now. Now I'm using this internal envelope, which just has an attack and a decay, to control this parameter, the crossfade curve. And we'll look at that more in depth when we're actually applying the LFOs. But just so you know, that's how that works. I can drop this over here as well, and I can create a modulation range with that. So that's an overview of the low-frequency oscillator. And now we'll move on to seeing how we can apply this low-frequency oscillator in our sound design. See you there.